Chapter 1. The Reality. Most planning businesses are operating in. Most financial planning businesses are busy. They are well-intentioned, and they are working harder than ever. Advisors are meeting clients. Staff are processing work. Compliance obligations are being met. Revenue is coming in. On the surface, the business appears to be functioning, but underneath that activity sits a quieter reality. Decisions are being made reactively, not deliberately. Processes exist, but they are incomplete, outdated, or followed inconsistently. Important information lives in people's heads instead of in systems. Reporting tells the business what has already happened, not what is about to go wrong. Control is assumed rather than demonstrated. This is not due to incompetence or lack of effort. In most cases, it is the natural outcome of how planning businesses evolve. Many practices are built around a capable founder. As the client base grows, complexity increases. Staff are added to relieve pressure. Systems are patched together to cope with volume. New tools are introduced to solve immediate problems. Each decision makes sense at the time. Very few are wrong in isolation. Over time, however, the business becomes a collection of workarounds. Client service depends on specific individuals. Data quality varies depending on who entered it and when. Reporting is manually adjusted to make it usable. Key tasks are completed because someone remembers to do them, not because the system requires them. When something goes wrong, it is usually addressed with more effort, rather than fixing the underlying structure. The result is a business that feels busy but fragile. Founders often sense this. They feel central to too many decisions. They struggle to take extended time away. They worry about what would happen if a key staff member left. Each year looks similar to the last, despite good intentions. From the outside, the practice may look successful. From the inside, it often feels harder than it should. This is not a failure state. It is a transition state. Most planning businesses eventually reach a point where effort alone is no longer enough. What worked at a smaller size no longer provides control. The business does not need more motivation, better people, or new software. It needs structure. Understanding this reality clearly is the first step. Chapter 2. Why effort is high, but control is low. In many financial planning businesses, effort is not the problem. Long hours are common, staff are busy, advisors are stretched, tasks are completed, clients are serviced, deadlines are met. And yet, despite this sustained effort, many businesses struggle to feel truly in control. This gap between effort and control is one of the defining characteristics of mid-sized planning practices. The reason is simple, but uncomfortable. Effort compensates for missing structure, but it cannot replace it. When a business lacks clear systems, people step in to fill the gaps. They remember things. They double-check work. They manually reconcile data. They keep an eye on issues that the system does not surface on its own. Over time, this becomes normal. High effort is mistaken for good management. Control, however, is something different. Control exists when the business operates predictably, regardless of who is present on a given day. It exists when exceptions are visible, when responsibilities are clear, and when performance can be understood without interpretation or explanation. Control is not about working harder. It is about reducing reliance on effort altogether. In most planning businesses, the operating environment actively undermines control. Processes are informal or only partially documented. They evolve through habit rather than design. Two staff members may perform the same task in slightly different ways, both believing they are doing it correctly. Over time, these variations compound. The business continues to function, but consistency erodes. Data is another major contributor. Information is usually captured to satisfy compliance requirements, not to support management decisions. Fields are left incomplete. Naming conventions vary. Key data points are stored in free text rather than structured formats. Reports can be produced, but only after manual adjustment. As a result, leadership spends time interpreting numbers rather than acting on them. This creates a subtle but important dynamic. Problems are discovered late. Issues are addressed after they have already caused friction. Decisions are made based on past outcomes rather than current conditions. The business feels reactive even when everyone is working hard. People absorb the consequences. Founders become the point of escalation because they know how things work. Senior staff carry undocumented knowledge that others rely on. Office managers chase tasks instead of overseeing systems. Advisors solve operational problems that should never reach them. Effort increases because the structure does not absorb complexity. Over time, this environment reinforces itself. When effort saves the day, the underlying system is not questioned. When a crisis is resolved through heroics, it is remembered as success rather than as a warning. Control is deferred because things appear to be working, but the cost accumulates quietly. High effort is exhausting. It limits capacity. It increases key person risk. It makes the business fragile in the face of growth, change, or disruption. Most importantly, it obscures where the real problems sit. When everything depends on effort, it becomes difficult to distinguish between normal workload and structural failure. This is why many improvement initiatives fail. They add more tasks, more tools, more reporting. Effort increases again, but control does not. Until the business deliberately shifts its focus from effort to structure, this imbalance persists. Control does not emerge naturally from hard work. It must be designed. The next chapter explores where most attempts to improve the business quietly go wrong, and why well-meaning change efforts often reinforce the very problems they are trying to solve. Chapter 3. The hidden cost of operating without a business system. Operating without a clearly defined business system rarely presents itself as an immediate problem. Many financial planning businesses continue to function, generate revenue, and even grow without one. Clients are serviced. Compliance obligations are met. Staff remain busy. From the outside, the practice appears viable. From the inside, however, costs accumulate quietly and persistently. One of the earliest hidden costs is decision overload. In the absence of clear systems, decisions that should be automated or predefined are repeatedly pushed back onto people. Staff must decide how to interpret incomplete processes. Advisors must decide how work should move when circumstances vary. Managers must constantly decide which issues deserve attention today. Individually, these decisions appear minor. Collectively, they consume significant mental energy and create constant distraction. This environment leads to inefficiency that is difficult to measure. Work is reviewed multiple times because standards are not embedded. Data is checked manually because its reliability cannot be assumed. Meetings are held to clarify expectations that should already be clear. Time is spent correcting, following up, and re-explaining. None of this work is visible in job descriptions or capacity models, yet it absorbs a material portion of each week. Another significant cost is delayed awareness. Without a business system, issues are usually discovered after they have already caused disruption. Capacity problems emerge when deadlines are missed. Data issues are identified when reporting becomes unreliable. Client service issues surface through complaints rather than early indicators. Management becomes retrospective by default. The business responds to outcomes rather than shaping them. Risk concentration is another critical and often underestimated cost. In system-light businesses, knowledge accumulates in individuals. Certain staff members become relied upon not because they're uniquely talented, but because they hold undocumented information. Founders retain oversight because they do not trust the system to surface problems independently. This concentration feels efficient until it is tested. Absence exposes it. Turnover stresses it. Growth amplifies it. There is also a cost to adaptability. Businesses without systems struggle to absorb change. Introducing new staff takes longer. Adopting new technology is more disruptive. Responding to regulatory change requires more manual effort. Each change increases strain because the business lacks a stable operating backbone. Over time, these costs shape behavior. Leaders become cautious about growth. Founders hesitate to step back. Improvement initiatives feel risky because the business already feels stretched. What appears to be a capacity issue is often a structural one. Importantly, none of these costs appear neatly on a profit and loss statement. They show up instead as fatigue, frustration, and limits on ambition. The business works, but it does not feel robust. That is the hidden price of operating without a business system. Chapter 4, where most improvement efforts quietly fail. Most planning business owners are acutely aware that their business could operate more smoothly. As a result, improvement efforts are common. New software is implemented. Processes are documented. External consultants are engaged. Training programs are delivered. The intent is genuine. And yet, despite that intent, many of these initiatives fail to produce lasting change. The failure is rarely dramatic. Instead, the business slowly returns to its previous state. One reason improvement efforts fail is that they often target symptoms rather than causes. When reporting is unclear, a new report is created. When tasks are missed, additional checklists are added. When staff feels stretched, another hire is made. Each action addresses an immediate issue. But the underlying operating structure remains untouched. The problem is deferred, not resolved. Fragmentation is another common issue. Improvements are introduced in isolation, rather than as part of a coherent system. A process is documented without aligning data requirements. A new tool is introduced without redesigning workflows. Responsibilities are adjusted without clarifying ownership. Over time, the business accumulates initiatives rather than integration. There is also a consistent overestimation of adoption. Documenting a process does not mean it will be followed. Training staff does not guarantee behavior change. In the absence of structural reinforcement, people revert to familiar habits, particularly under pressure. Over time, documented processes exist, but they do not govern how work actually happens. Many improvement efforts unintentionally increase effort rather than reduce it. Additional reporting is introduced. More meetings are added. Oversight expands, all in the name of control. This creates the appearance of diligence, while further entrenching the effort-heavy environment described earlier. Staff become busier, not better supported. Control remains elusive. Because these initiatives are well-intentioned, their failure is often misdiagnosed. Leaders conclude that the issue lies with discipline, engagement, or people. More effort is applied. The structural question remains unasked. Perhaps most importantly, improvement efforts often lack a unifying objective. Without a clear definition of what good looks like operationally, changes drift. Initiatives compete for attention. Priorities shift. Momentum fades. Quiet failure is the most dangerous kind. It reinforces skepticism about change. It conditions the business to accept its current state as inevitable. In reality, the problem is not that improvement is impossible. It is that improvement without structure is unsustainable. Chapter 5. The Structural Problem. BOH is actually solving. At the heart of most operationally strained planning businesses is not a lack of skill, commitment, or care. The people involved are usually capable, conscientious, and working hard. The issue is structural. The business lacks a single, integrated system that defines how it operates, how information flows, and how control is maintained. This absence rarely appears as a single, obvious failure. Instead, it creates a cascade of secondary problems that look unrelated on the surface, but share a common cause beneath. Processes become informal rather than deliberate. Data standards are inconsistent. Responsibilities blur over time. Visibility is partial and often delayed. Management relies on judgment, memory, and experience rather than reliable signals. Effort compensates for these gaps, but it cannot replace structure. When a business does not have an operating backbone, work is held together by people rather than by design. Tasks are completed because someone remembers to do them. Issues are escalated because decision boundaries are unclear. Reporting requires explanation because inputs are inconsistent. From the outside, the business may still function. From the inside, it often feels fragile and effort-heavy. This is the structural problem BOH is actually solving. It is not focused on fixing isolated issues. It is not about optimizing individual processes in isolation. It is not about implementing software or adding layers of oversight. It is about designing how the business runs as a whole. A true business system performs three critical functions. First, it defines what matters. It makes explicit which activities, which data points, and which controls are essential to the health of the business. Not everything needs to be measured or controlled. A well-designed system focuses attention on the few things that genuinely influence outcomes. This clarity reduces noise and prevents effort from being diluted across low-impact activity. Second, it enforces consistency. Standards are embedded into workflows rather than enforced through supervision. Variation is reduced by design. The way work is done no longer depends on who is present, how busy they are, or how experienced they feel. Consistency becomes a property of the system rather than the individual. This is critical for scalability and risk management. Third, it creates visibility. A business system allows leadership to see what is happening as it happens, not months later through retrospective reporting. Exceptions are surfaced early. Performance can be observed without interpretation. Risk becomes visible before it turns into disruption. This visibility enables deliberate decision-making rather than reactive response. When these three elements are in place, behavior changes naturally. Decisions move out of people's heads and into the system. Exceptions are logged rather than hidden. Reporting shifts from being an administrative exercise to a management tool. Effort is redirected away from firefighting and toward value-adding work. Importantly, this shift is not cultural or motivational. It does not depend on people caring more, being more disciplined, or working harder. It is architectural. The structure absorbs complexity that people have previously been compensating for. This reduces reliance on individual heroics and key person knowledge. BOH's role is to address this structural gap. By establishing an operating backbone, the business transitions from being person-led to system-led. Control becomes embedded rather than assumed. Improvement initiatives align rather than compete with one another. Growth becomes safer because complexity is absorbed by design rather than effort. Leadership becomes less central to day-to-day stability and more focused on stewardship. This structural change also alters how the business feels to run. Pressure reduces, visibility improves, confidence increases. The organization becomes more resilient to change, to scale, and to succession. What once felt fragile begins to feel deliberate and stable. The next chapter turns from structure to sequence and explains why control must be re-established before performance can be sustainably improved. Chapter 6. Re-establishing control before chasing. Performance. In many planning businesses, performance is pursued before control is established. Growth targets are set, revenue goals are tracked, capacity is stretched in pursuit of higher output. This focus is understandable, but more often than not, it compounds existing problems rather than resolving them. Control is a prerequisite for sustainable performance. Without control, performance gains are fragile and difficult to repeat. Control, in this context, does not mean rigidity or micromanagement. It means the business operates in a predictable and observable way. It means leadership can see what is happening across the business without relying on informal updates or personal intervention. It means that when something deviates from expectations, it becomes visible early and can be addressed deliberately. Many planning businesses mistake activity for control. Busy diaries, full task lists, regular meetings. These create the impression that the business is being managed closely. In reality, they are often compensations for a lack of structural clarity. People are working hard to hold the business together because the system itself is not doing that work. Re-establishing control begins with recognizing that effort is not a reliable control mechanism. Effort varies with energy, experience, and circumstance. Systems do not. When control depends on effort, the business becomes sensitive to disruption. When control is embedded in structure, the business becomes resilient. The process of re-establishing control requires a deliberate shift in focus. Instead of asking how to increase output, the business must first ask how it ensures consistency. Instead of measuring success purely through results, it must measure whether the underlying operating conditions are stable. This often feels counterintuitive, particularly in growth-oriented environments. But without stability, performance cannot compound. Control is re-established by defining clear standards. These standards apply to processes, to data, and to decision-making. They specify how work is meant to flow, what information must exist, and how exceptions are identified and handled. Importantly, these standards are enforced by the system, not by individuals constantly checking compliance. Visibility is central to control. A controlled business can see its own state clearly. It knows where capacity is constrained. It knows where risks are emerging. It knows where performance is drifting. This visibility reduces anxiety because it replaces assumption with evidence. Once control is restored, performance conversations change. Targets become more realistic. Growth becomes safer. Improvement efforts become cumulative rather than disruptive. The business stops oscillating between periods of intensity and exhaustion. Chasing performance without control often leads to burnout and disappointment. Re-establishing control, first, creates the conditions in which performance improvements are both achievable and durable. It is a quieter, more disciplined approach, but it is also the one that delivers far better outcomes. Chapter 7. The business system as the operating backbone. A business system is often misunderstood. It is assumed to be documents, processes, or software, procedure manuals, workflow charts, technology implementations. These may support a system, but they are not the system itself. A true business system is the operating backbone of the organization. It determines how work moves, how decisions are made, and how control is maintained across the business. Without this backbone, operations rely on judgment, memory, and effort. People remember what needs to be done. They decide how tasks should be handled. They step in when something feels wrong. This can work for a time, particularly in smaller founder-led practices. But as complexity increases, reliance on individual effort becomes fragile. The business holds together because people compensate, not because the system carries the load. When an operating backbone exists, the business gains coherence. Work flows predictably. Decisions follow clear logic. Control is embedded, not improvised. At its core, the operating backbone integrates three elements: structure, flow, and feedback. Structure defines roles, responsibilities, standards, and decision rights. It removes ambiguity. Ownership becomes clear. Flow determines how work moves from start to finish. Tasks are triggered deliberately. Handovers are defined. Completion is visible. Feedback allows the business to see itself. It shows whether operations are working as intended. Deviations become visible early, not after problems escalate. In many planning businesses, these elements exist only in fragments. Roles overlap. Workflows vary by preference. Feedback arrives late, often informally, usually when something breaks. The business functions, but it lacks alignment. Outcomes depend on who is involved, not on how the business is designed to operate. The operating backbone brings these fragments together into a single design. Roles align with workflows. Feedback becomes systematic. The business operates as a whole, rather than as individual effort. An effective backbone does not attempt to control everything. Overly prescriptive systems become brittle and resisted. Instead, a well-designed backbone focuses on what matters most: critical processes, essential data, key controls that disproportionately affect outcomes. Variation is allowed where it adds value. It is reduced where it creates risk. Importantly, the backbone shifts responsibility from people to the system. Tasks are triggered by structure, not memory. Standards are enforced by design, not supervision. Exceptions are recorded, not quietly absorbed. This reduces key person risk. Knowledge moves out of individuals and into the business. It also changes how improvement occurs. Changes are no longer layered on top of existing problems. They are assessed by their impact on the whole system. The business evolves without losing coherence. For leadership, this creates confidence. Decisions rely on signals, not anecdotes. Oversight becomes lighter because issues surface early. Time moves from firefighting to stewardship. For staff, the backbone creates clarity. Expectations are explicit. Workflows are predictable. Accountability is consistent. Stress reduces. Focus improves. When designed properly, the business system is not overhead. It is the mechanism that delivers stability, scalability, and transferability. Without an operating backbone, growth amplifies fragility. With one in place, growth becomes deliberate, manageable, and sustainable. Chapter 8. Turning data into management, not reporting. Data is not scarce in planning businesses. Client records, financial figures, compliance logs, activity histories. Multiple systems capture data constantly: CRMs, portfolio platforms, accounting software, compliance tools. And yet, despite this abundance, many businesses struggle to use data effectively for management. The problem is not how much data exists, it is how that data is collected, structured, and used. In most practices, data exists to satisfy external requirements. Compliance dictates what is recorded. Platforms dictate how information is stored. Reports are produced to explain what has already happened. As a result, data becomes historical. It describes outcomes after the fact. It explains the past, but rarely influences decisions before those outcomes occur. Management data serves a different purpose. Its role is not to explain yesterday, it is to shape today and inform tomorrow. Management data supports decisions. It highlights exceptions. It provides early signals that something is drifting before it becomes a problem. For data to perform this role, it must be intentional, consistent, and aligned to how the business actually operates. The first shift is clarity about what data matters. Not all available data is useful. In fact, too much data often obscures what is important. Effective management focuses on a small number of high-impact measures, metrics chosen because they influence outcomes, not because they are easy to extract or traditionally reported. This clarity directs attention to things that can be acted upon. The second shift is standardization. Data must be reliable to be useful. That requires clear definitions, mandatory fields, consistent formats. When standards are optional, reports require explanation. Meetings become debates about accuracy. Management time is spent validating data rather than acting on it. Standardization removes this friction. Data means the same thing, regardless of who enters it or when it is recorded. The third shift is timing. Backward-looking reporting has limited value for control. While history has its place, it does not support day-to-day management. Management data reflects current conditions, emerging risks, capacity constraints, early signs of drift. This requires regular, structured review, not ad hoc analysis, not curiosity-driven reporting, but a deliberate rhythm that keeps leadership connected to the present state of the business. When these shifts occur, the role of reporting changes. Reporting stops being an administrative task. It becomes a management function. Conversations shift from explanations to decisions. Meetings focus on exceptions, not updates. Accountability becomes clearer, because expectations are visible and performance is observable. Importantly, this transformation does not require more data. It requires alignment between data, systems, and decision-making. When the business system defines what matters operationally, data collection follows naturally. Fields exist for a reason. Reports have a purpose. Data quality improves because it is used, not because it is enforced. Turning data into management reduces uncertainty. Leaders no longer rely on instinct or anecdote. Confidence increases because decisions are grounded in evidence. In this way, effective use of data reinforces the shift from effort-driven operations to system-led control. It strengthens structure, improves visibility, and enables deliberate management. The chapters that follow build on this foundation and explore how these conditions translate into consistent behavior, reduced founder dependency, and a fundamentally different experience of running a planning business. Chapter 9. Creating Consistency Without Founder Dependence. Founder dependence is one of the most common structural constraints in planning businesses. It is rarely named directly. It does not arise from ego or poor intent. It arises because the business grows faster than its structure, and the founder becomes the default source of consistency. In the early stages, this works. The founder sets standards, decisions are made quickly, issues are resolved immediately. At this stage, the founder is the system. As the practice grows, complexity increases. More clients, more staff, more regulation. Decisions require coordination. Exceptions increase. Rather than diminishing, the founder's involvement grows. Questions escalate upward. Judgment concentrates. Consistency becomes conditional. When the founder is present, the business feels controlled. When they are absent, uncertainty appears. Decisions slow. Staff hesitate. Standards blur. Importantly, this pattern is reinforced by good intentions. Each intervention restores momentum. Each override improves outcomes in the short term. Over time, the system learns a rule. Escalation is safer than autonomy. This is when founder dependence becomes structural risk. Reducing that risk does not mean removing the founder's influence. It means embedding it into the system. Consistency without founder dependence comes from explicit structure. Processes are defined clearly, standards are visible, decision boundaries are known. Data means the same thing regardless of who enters it. Escalation occurs by design, not by habit. When this structure exists, behavior changes naturally. Staff rely on the system, not personal preference. New team members integrate faster. Accountability becomes consistent. The founder's role shifts from operational hub to steward of design. Judgment moves from intervention to architecture. Risk reduces. Succession becomes practical. Growth no longer amplifies fragility. Consistency created by systems is quieter than consistency enforced by personality. But it is far more durable. It allows the business to operate reliably, regardless of who is present. And it marks the transition from a founder-led practice to a system-led enterprise. Chapter 10. How operational clarity changes. Behavior. Operational clarity is often underestimated, not because it lacks impact, but because its impact is quiet. It does not arrive with dramatic results or sudden performance spikes. Instead, it reshapes behavior gradually and persistently. Over time, those behavioral shifts change how the business runs, how decisions are made, and how work feels. In environments where clarity is low, behavior becomes adaptive. People rely on experience, judgment, intuition. They interpret instructions, fill gaps, prioritize urgency over importance. Work gets done, but it requires constant effort. It is inconsistent, and it is tiring. When operational clarity improves, that effort is no longer required. Clarity begins with explicit expectations. Roles are defined. Responsibilities are unambiguous. Processes describe how work flows, not just what must be done. Data standards remove guesswork. Information means the same thing across the business. Routine tasks no longer require individual interpretation. The cognitive load created by uncertainty disappears. This shift changes behavior quickly. Variation reduces. Work becomes consistent. Outcomes stabilize. Errors decline. Rework diminishes. People stop compensating for ambiguity and start focusing on execution. Accountability changes as well. In unclear environments, accountability is personal, emotionally charged. Responsibility is debated after something goes wrong. In clear environments, accountability is structural. Deviations are visible. Exceptions are logged. Issues are addressed through improvement, not blame. Meetings change. Less explanation. Fewer updates. More focus on decisions and exceptions. Conversations become calmer, shorter, more productive. Management shifts from reactive to deliberate. Clarity also improves morale. Stress reduces when work is predictable. New staff integrate faster. Experienced staff are freed from constant explanation. Importantly, clarity reinforces itself. As behavior aligns with structure, reliance on effort declines. As reliance on effort declines, trust in the system grows. The business develops a stable operating rhythm. Work feels intentional, not urgent. Leadership changes too. Oversight becomes lighter. Issues surface automatically. Confidence replaces vigilance. Operational clarity is not about control for its own sake. It is about creating conditions where people can perform well without constant uncertainty. When structure supports behavior, the business stops relying on heroics and starts relying on design. The behavioral changes that follow are not forced. They are natural. People respond to the environment they operate in. When that environment is coherent, predictable, and fair, behavior follows. Over time, this alignment becomes one of the defining traits of a well-run planning business. Chapter 11. What a well-run planning business starts to feel like. The difference between a well-run planning business and a struggling one is not always visible from the outside. Revenue may be similar, client numbers comparable, compliance outcomes identical. The distinction is felt internally. A well-run business feels different to operate. The first change is a reduction in background stress. Issues still arise, but they are expected. They are visible. They are manageable. The sense of being constantly behind begins to fade. Time behaves differently. Work days feel purposeful. Meetings become shorter. Interruptions reduce. Fewer issues require urgent escalation. Founders and senior staff regain time to think rather than react. Trust also changes. Leadership trusts the system to surface issues. Staff trust the system to support them. Clients experience consistency, regardless of who they deal with. Vigilance is replaced by confidence. The business becomes easier to explain. Processes make sense. Data tells a coherent story. Reporting reflects reality. Conversations improve with staff, with partners, with external stakeholders. Importantly, emotional space returns. Decisions feel lighter. Growth is considered deliberately. Succession becomes practical, not distant. This experience is not created by exceptional people working harder. It is created by structure doing its job quietly. When the operating backbone is strong, the business carries its own weight. For many owners, this state feels unfamiliar. After years of reactivity, pressure can feel normal. Urgency can feel important. Calm can feel suspicious. In reality, reduced noise is a signal. The system is absorbing complexity, not pushing it back onto people. The shift is often noticed before it is named. Fewer ad hoc questions. Issues raised through agreed channels. Conversations become factual. Work progresses with less checking. These changes are subtle, but they accumulate. Outsiders notice too. New staff sense clarity. Partners notice consistency. Acquirers see a business that functions without personality dependence. The organization feels settled, deliberate, credible. Most importantly, the founder's relationship with the business changes. It no longer needs to be carried mentally. Absence becomes possible. Strategy replaces vigilance. The business begins to feel like an asset, not an obligation. This feeling is not accidental. It is the outcome of deliberate structural work. When systems are well designed, they fade into the background. What remains is a business that feels steady, understandable, and capable. That feeling is not a byproduct of success. It is one of its clearest indicators. Chapter 12. What changes? Once the system is in place. When a system is properly established, change does not arrive as a single moment. There is no dramatic shift, no visible turning point. The business continues to operate, but it does so with a different underlying dynamic. Over time, the cumulative effect becomes unmistakable. The first change is predictability. Outcomes stabilize. Results are consistent. Variation can be explained by identifiable factors, not guesswork. Planning becomes reliable. Assumptions are grounded in observable reality, not hope or habit. Management conversations change, less reacting to surprises, more understanding of patterns. Capacity changes as well. Effort once spent checking, correcting, and chasing is released. That capacity becomes usable. Time reappears, not as spare time, but as productive space. Growth becomes possible without immediate pressure. Improvement compounds instead of competing. Decision-making evolves. Leadership operates with clearer information. Trade-offs are explicit. Risks are understood. Decisions feel deliberate, not reactive. The business anticipates issues instead of absorbing them. Strategy moves from intention to execution because the environment supports follow-through. From a people perspective, fairness improves. Expectations are consistent. Accountability is visible. Performance discussions become objective, not personal. Anxiety reduces. Engagement improves. People know what success looks like and how it is measured. One of the most significant changes is the reduction of key person risk. Knowledge moves out of individuals and into the system. Absence becomes manageable. Turnover is absorbed. Succession shifts from theory to practice. The founder's relationship with the business changes too. It no longer needs to be carried mentally. Time away becomes possible. Strategy replaces vigilance. The business starts to feel like an asset to be stewarded, not an obligation to be managed constantly. Externally, the business becomes clearer. Processes make sense. Data tells a consistent story. Reporting reflects reality. Credibility increases, not because control is claimed, but because it is visible. Future change is absorbed differently. New tools integrate cleanly. Regulatory demands are addressed systematically. Growth initiatives are assessed by their impact on the backbone. The business becomes adaptable without becoming unstable. Perhaps the most telling change is how the business feels. Background stress reduces. Issues still arise, but they are expected. They are manageable. Confidence replaces vigilance. Work feels purposeful, not urgent. This state is not created by exceptional people working harder. It is created by structure, doing its job quietly. Once the system is in place, people are freed to do their best work within clear boundaries. What changes is not just performance. It is the experience of running the business. The organization moves from coping to choosing. That shift is the true value of system-led design. Epilogue. From effort to design. Across this series, we haven't talked about working harder, or growing faster, or doing more. We've talked about how businesses actually run, and why so many quietly struggle, even when the people inside them are capable and committed. The central idea is simple. Effort is not a strategy, and control cannot depend on memory, judgment, or presence. When a business relies on people to compensate for missing structure, pressure accumulates. Fragility increases, and growth becomes risky. When structure is in place, something different happens. Work flows, decisions clarify, issues surface early. People stop compensating and start executing. The business becomes calmer, more predictable, more resilient. This is not about rigidity or bureaucracy or removing humanity from the organization. It is about design, about building an operating backbone that carries the weight of complexity so people don't have to. When that backbone exists, performance improves, risk reduces, succession becomes real, and the experience of running the business fundamentally changes. The business moves from coping to choosing. That shift is not a byproduct of success. It is one of its clearest signals. Thank you for listening.